Hi everybody, this is Anna. Welcome back to Painting Big. Oh my gosh, it's been forever since we did one of these fundamentals videos. I'm so sorry. I had real life interrupt. I wrote a book and I published it, and now I'm about to publish the second book. But here is my book. It's East of the Sun by A.E. Becker. That's my pen name. And it is a young adult fantasy based on Norwegian folktales. So if you like, adventures, fantasy adventure stories, go check it out. And hey, you can read it for free on Kindle Unlimited. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get down to actually what we're here to talk about today, which is layering. Possibly the fundamental core technique in all of miniature painting. This is the one. You can do shadows, you can do highlights, you can do textures, you can do so much with this. So we're going to just touch on it with a very basic video today. And in the future, as I expand things, perhaps we'll get down to like talking more about all of the cool and interesting things, and a little bit more of the nitty-gritty about layering, okay? But today, we're introducing you to the layering concept. Let's get to it. Okay, so I have my nice little Templar here. We're going to be working with green today. I'm going to be painting while I'm talking to you guys. So here are my colors. That's my base color. It's Brilliant Green from Master Series Paint, Reaper Master Series Paint, which I created, just in case I didn't say that before on this channel. I'm actually the one who developed that. So yeah, that's me. So let's just talk a bit about what layering is and what you can expect from this, all right? Layering is probably the most common wet over dry. So you're putting wet paint over a dry layer. Wet over dry technique you will use in all of miniature painting. When you decide to paint in your shadows instead of doing a wash, that is layering. When you paint on your highlights without using a technique like dry brushing, that's layering. In today's miniature world, layering is a term that's often connected to the effect of getting smooth blending, but it's so much more of a versatile technique than that. You don't have to go for smooth blends if you're trying to create a particular effect. You can use layering to create awesome textures for cloth or skin or hair or leather or metal. And you can use layering to create weathering effects like dings and scratches and mud and dirt effects. So that's a lot to unpack, and obviously we won't get to all of that in one video. But I do want to talk about the basics of layering today in a way that will hopefully set you guys up for success. And if you're somebody who's been trying layering but struggling with it for a while, then maybe something in this video will help you troubleshoot. There are 4 factors that influence your success with layering. First one of these is a brush with a really good tip. You can use a Kolinsky Sable if you have it. And if you don't know what that is, you can go check out my fundamentals video on brushes, which has a lot of talking and only a little bit of like actual camera action, but it's still useful, I swear. You can use a synthetic brush with a good tip. We usually won't have quite as good a tip, but it's really close. You can see I've got a little bit of deformation on the tip on the one on the right. But this is a synthetic. This is a decent quality synthetic. It can be serviceable, especially in the beginning. When you start getting into aspects of layering that include really fine textures and you need your brush to perform for a while, what you're going to probably find is that the synthetic is going to start like hooking at the tip, and essentially it is going to degrade much faster. These sables can go years as long as you like don't leave them sitting in the paint water. So at that point, maybe it's worth moving away from synthetics. That said, there's at least one painter out there who is very good and who just would prefer to just go through endless synthetics rather than getting natural hair brushes. More power to you if you are that person. All right, number 2 is having properly thinned paint. What properly thinned means really depends on the technique that you're going for, and also how many stages of color you want to do, and how high, for example, what kind of transition are you doing? Are you doing from dark to light? Are you doing from mid to light? What are you doing? If you are attempting blending, as I will be illustrating on this model, then keep in mind that the more transitions you do, the more like closer together your transitions, the thicker you can leave your paint and still get a decent blend. But if you can see a definite jump in color like this, you're better off going thinner rather than thicker. If I was going with thicker paint here, I would probably have a color mixed that's like a half and half between these, and definitely a half and half between these. These I might be able to make it work. But the lighter you get, the more hard it is to get a smoother blend. So we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So what do I mean about thinner paint really? Well, with Master Series paint, what I'm usually starting with in layering is a 1-to-1, like 1 drop of paint for 1 drop of water. If I have a really transparent or darker color that I know doesn't have great coverage, I could go maybe 2 drops of paint to 1 drop of water and still get good layering. As you move closer to white, however, and light colors, you end up having to thin a lot more. And that's because white is just a pigment that has a lot of intrinsic coverage. Just to give you an idea of how light or how heavy on the water that can get, when I thin pure white to get it to smooth layering consistency, I actually do 2 drops of paint to 5 drops of water, which is a 1 to 2.5 ratio. That is as thin as you are ever going to need for layering. So if you try layering and you've been struggling and you're doing something like 1 drop of paint to 3 drops of water or more, too much water, scale back. On the other hand, if you've been trying layering with, say, a 3-to-1 ratio and your paint colors are pretty far apart from each other, then you want to thin more or mix more transition stages. This is, however, assuming that you are seeking smooth blends. If you're doing something like textures, you actually want to see your brush strokes, so you're going to adjust your expectations for that. We'll cover that in another video. Okay, number 3, now we're down to the nitty-gritty. Less paint on your brush. Very little paint on your brush. I have a whole video over on my Patreon at patreon.com/paintingbig, where I talk about nothing but unloading your brush properly for techniques. As new painters begin to thin their paint, this is one of the biggest errors I see. Remember that you have to unload a lot of paint out of your brush after you load it in order to keep control, especially with thinned paint. Otherwise, when you try to apply your paints, you're going to see puddles or the paint running somewhere you just don't want it. And with layering, you really do want control. Brush unloading is really important in this hobby, and I wish more people talked about it because everyone seems to assume it's a given, but then I see a lot of people who struggle. So I usually only dip my brush in about 1/3 to 1/2 of the brush, and then I unload it. And the number of dabs it takes to unload depends on how thin your paint is. I unload my brush onto the side of the well, but if you're using a wet palette, people will use just the blank paper, even though it adds some water, they don't mind. They'll use sometimes the side of the wet palette, the plastic. Sometimes they'll have a tile or a separate palette where they'll unload it. Some people even unload it onto their thumb. Looking at you, Marika. I don't recommend the thumb technique, but sometimes you get in that habit, and I won't hold it against you. If you get results, I really can't say anything, right? So a note on, let's just do that. A note on brush shape and size. When you are thinning your paint a lot, it is often to your advantage to use smaller and thinner brushes rather than larger and fatter ones. And the reason is that a smaller, thinner brush is just naturally going to carry less paint, so you don't need to unload as much before you get to the point where you can touch the brush to the miniature. If you are prone or used to, or you just enjoy using larger brushes or a thicker brush with a fatter belly, just keep in mind you're going to end up unloading more, because those bigger brushes or fatter brushes, they're made to carry a lot of paint. Number four thing that will impact your success with layering is brushstroke and direction. When you first lay down your brush after you load it or unload it, you're not going to bring up very much paint. You're not going to let much off the brush. When you stop your stroke, and I'll get closer so you can see this and get in focus. When you stop your stroke, this is a brush stroke, you see that little puddle at the tip. The essence of layering is to keep that in mind and to work with it. And if you're seeing where your brush stroke is too consistent like this, you need to thin your paint just a little bit more. I dropped another little brush full of water in there. Now I'll try to do this again for you. Troubleshooting is good, so you can see. So it's load up brush, remember, very little paint on it. Unload brush. And then let's see. Oh, there we go. Do you see that? See how you have a much lighter stroke here, and you have a darker stroke where you are picking up the brush. When you pick up the brush, you leave that little puddle of paint. And this is the core element of the layering brush stroke. So how do you use this? Essentially, you want to start your brush stroke where you want the color to be lightest, and end your brush stroke where you want the color to be strongest. So if I go here and I'm doing a layering brush stroke, I want to start my stroke down here and pull back toward the top, because the top is where I want it to be lighter, and in the fold is where I want it to be darker. And honestly, let's go to the next color up. You can use any brush stroke you like. I know at least one painter who uses cross hatching to build up their layers. But, and I'm just doing this, you can see the layers, but you can also see how it's working. But I personally like the line. I like the feathering style. So this is basically how layering works. You keep building up your layers when you're trying to use it for blending, and you go up to your highest highlight, and you try to get a kind of blended effect. Obviously I want all of this top of this fold to be lighter, but you want to be able to see a transition. You can see that this paint here is, the top is looking a little chalky. That is either usually not enough thinning or too much, and so you have to kind of experiment. Here I'm thinking it's not enough. I haven't thinned. This one is a lighter color. Remember, when we get to lighter colors, then we have to thin a little bit more. I just dropped 2 big drops of water in there. While I try to make this work out a little bit better, I want to talk about 2 last things, and then we'll end this video. Number 1 is a note about transparent paint. So if you are trying to get smooth blends, chances are you're working with really thin paint. And what you're going to end up doing is exactly what I'm doing here. Notice that I'm not just doing one layer of this light green. I'm actually doing several layers of it. I'm building it up. When your paints are translucent, your first layer isn't actually going to be full strength. You're going to see through it. And so you want to keep going over in smaller and smaller areas until you get that blended appearance. And the second note is about glazing. So I'll be doing a video on glazing for the next video, but suffice to say that almost nobody can get smooth blends without glazing. Glazing is a technique where you thin your paint excessively, even more than a wash. You thin it to the point where it's colored water, like that. That's thinner than a wash. And when you put this paint over your surface, you can tint the color or you can hide brush strokes because it'll lay down kind of a smooth layer over the top. Now, my next fundamentals video will be about glazing, but suffice to say that layering and glazing go hand in hand, because almost nobody does a perfect blend out the gate just with layering. So they have to throw that glazing down over the top. You see how all this is looking a little more blended, a little more fuzzy? There you go. And you can essentially glaze as much as you need. Will you need to reapply your top highlight? Yeah, you will. But you'll have blended all your transitions much more nicely. So you can see how that made that look, and it took the chalkiness away as well. So thank you folks for tuning in. I know this one was just a little longer than they have been in the past, but I wanted to put a lot of information into it and really give you a foundation and also demo a little bit. What I'm going to be doing with these new fundamentals videos is that I am going to be doing the video for my free YouTube. My patrons get to see the video early, and then it goes up on the YouTube. But for my $2 tier of the Patreon, I'm going to be doing a companion PDF for these videos, where I write down all of this information so that people can have it to hand. So if you're interested, patreon.com/paintingbig. For very little, then you get the companion PDFs for this. And if you want to wait for a few months and just make sure that there's a lot of information on there before you pay your $2 and grab it all, that's fine. No problem at all. I just wanted to let you know that that's what I'm going to be doing. And if you don't need it because you took awesome notes or you're just going to rewatch this video, that's great too. Thanks everybody for your support. I do appreciate your views and your subs. And I will talk to you again in the near future. This is Anne signing off.